Akia Garnett Show. Akia Garnett Show. Here to recreate. Akia Garnett Show. Inspired and empowered you, giving you the tools to build your brand. It's a new day for a new way to bring your vision to
Hello. It's Akia Garnett, your host for the Akia Garnett Show, and I am excited to welcome you to this week's edition of Tuesday Branding. It's a full day of programming free for you as small business owners and entrepreneurs to help you master your brand. We start out on Tuesday mornings at 10 a.m. with the Akia Garnett Show Eastern Standard, and then we move on over at 6 p.m. to Kick Fanny's Big Thinking with Akia Garnett. You can listen direct to Kick Fanny at kickfanny.com, and then we have My Brand Chat and iBrand Chat on Twitter, and that show starts at 8 p.m. It is a national show. We've got international recognition as well. The I for international is for International Brand Chat. You can find out more about those programs at akiagarnett.com. And again, you can listen direct to Kick Fanny's Big Thinking with Akia at kickfanny.com. Now, I'm excited about this week's show. I'm excited about this week's guest that I have on. I think you're going to find that he's got a wealth of information. His name is Lamont Robinson. He's the Vice President of Supplier Diversity for Nielsen. I know that you must be familiar with Nielsen. I'm excited because I was a Nielsen kid. I talked my folks into letting us have a Nielsen box on our television so that they could monitor what we were looking at. And of course, my family thought I was weird at that time for actually wanting to have a box on the television, but I was intrigued, and I definitely was a TV kid. I watched a lot of television. Also grew up around a lot of music as well, so TV and radio has always been a part of my life, and I'm just glad to be talking with someone who's working with Nielsen to give us an insight on how things operate at the company, and when it comes to supplier diversity, what their program is all about, and what kinds of opportunities you may find in supplier diversity if you're a minority in business or a woman in business or someone who'd like to partner with minorities and women in business. So supplier diversity is not just there for those who are qualified from a minority status or a gender status, but also people who just get it and who understand that it's good to do business with everybody that makes up the economics of this nation, everybody. And so I'm just grateful to be able to bring Lamont Robinson to you all today. Again, he's the Vice President of Nielsen Supplier Diversity Program, and he's got a lot of other things that he's going to be talking about with us today, namely a book that he has put out, which I'm excited to talk about as well. And so without further ado, I'd like to introduce to some and reacquaint with others, none other than Lamont Robinson. How are you today?
I'm doing well, Akia. Thank you very much for this great opportunity. I'm excited for today.
Great. Thank you so much for being my guest today. I met Lamont years and years ago. It had to be at least, I don't know, maybe 12 years ago. It's been a while. It may not have been that long, but it's definitely been a while. And when I met you, Lamont, you were in supply diversity with Cardinal Health. And tell us about the work that you did with Cardinal and how that program was when you left that organization.
You know, Cardinal is where I cut my teeth for supplier diversity. Mm-hmm. You know, my background was in procurement, and before that, accounting, and so Cardinal was the first company that gave me that opportunity to get into supplier diversity. Mm-hmm. And you know, the reason why I was able to be successful at Cardinal was because of two people. One was Kathy Ben, who was the leader of the program, and then you also had Martha Holmes, who was one of my peers. You know, Kathy really showed me a lot in terms of how do you go after opportunities with clients and really trying to find what the client's needs were in the area of supplier diversity. Then Martha, because Martha has over 30 plus years in supplier diversity, she taught me about the basics of supplier diversity. And those together, they gave me a great platform to be able to branch off and build my own program later on. But I'm telling you, I would not have success if it was not for those two ladies, Kathy Ben and Martha Holmes. And again, I'm extremely honored to be a part of their lives and the impact that they made on mine. is incredible.
Wow. Well, what a way to acknowledge mentors and folks who helped you along the earlier days of your career. I hope that they're listening and that they understand how touched you are to have been able to grow under them, because we don't always get a chance to thank people on air for sowing seed into our careers. So I applaud you for taking that step to say those great things about them on national air.
Thank you.
Now, when you left Cardinal Health and their Supplier Diversity program, you went outside of that same area. Where did you go?
So Cardinal was in the process of transitioning jobs from Illinois to Ohio, and at that time, I was approached by a company called VHA down in the Dallas, Texas area to basically come down and create a brand new program. And anyone that knows me know that I love to create something brand new or to fix something that's broken. So to create something that was brand new and something that I'd be able to put my brand on was it was an opportunity I could not resist. Plus, just being in the Chicago winters, I was a little cold and tired of shoveling snow, so having that opportunity to come down to Dallas was a great chance for me in a lot of ways. And so came down to VHA, and what VHA does is, what they do is they negotiate contract on behalf of hospitals. And so they have a contracting arm, Novation. So shortly after I came down to VHA, they moved me over to Novation, expanded my role, so then I was responsible for the Supplier Diversity program to basically help our what we call our members, which were the hospitals, the academic medical centers, colleges and universities that we supported. And so that was the first time that I was able to run my own Supplier Diversity program. So exciting times, because it allowed me to be innovative, and it gave me a chance to really, in a sense, establish my name in the marketplace.
Yeah, and you share something in common with a past guest of ours who was on last season, Mark Cartwright, who is at Novation now.
Absolutely. I heard that great interview. That actually inspired me, and it was funny because I was thinking I would love to be on that show, but I never reached out to you to do it. But Mark is a great person, and Mark is building his own brand.
Yeah,
he should. He's establishing his own brand at Novation.
Yeah,
but I'm always there to support.
Yeah. Hey, that's a shout out to you, Mark. We'll be in touch. Again, need to catch up with you and see how you're doing down there at Novation. And it's an honor. It really is to hear you talk about your transition throughout Supplier Diversity, Lamont. Now, you are now at Nielsen, and as I mentioned during our opening, I was a Nielsen kid. I was always intrigued with what they were doing. And I didn't at the time know I was going to end up in marketing. I didn't know I was going to be excited about, the consumer movement and consumer statistics, but it is interesting to be on the phone with you now talking about Nielsen. And tell me how you got involved with that program and ended up as VP of Supply Diversity for them.
Well, so when I was at Novation, we established a successful program. Everything was going well. I had been in healthcare for a while, so my name was increasing in terms of popularity among supplier diversity professionals in healthcare. So really, I had no need to look anywhere else, and I didn't. But then all of a sudden, I get this email from a recruiter at Nielsen, and it was a great opportunity to come and be their vice president of supplier diversity. The job was in Chicago at that time, and so I struggled with the thought of moving back to Chicago, because I've got young kids, and to move them away from an area for which they were fully integrated, I struggled with that. But at the same time, I thought, I need to explore this. There was something about Nielsen. Just like you, Nielsen was always one of those companies that intrigued me just because of the Nielsen ratings. But at the same time, also to create a successful supplier diversity program outside of healthcare was another thing that intrigued me, almost to a point where I was pushing myself and asking if I was ready to be to attempt to be successful in another industry. And so, the recruiter reached out to me, and I explored it, and I was fortunate enough to be hired as their vice president of supplier diversity. Could not have come into a better situation.
Now, from a supplier diversity management and leadership perspective, some people, they may see it as transactional you're focused on finding as many small businesses out there, minority businesses out there who can qualify to be considered a vendor for your company, and to help increase diverse spend dollars, and to help ensure that there's some equality across the procurement and the spread of the dollars that are spent each year to move your own mission forward. But people in supplier diversity are not just in supplier diversity because of the numbers. They're in supplier diversity because they truly, truly support this whole concept of inclusion and making sure that the marketplace looks a lot like the American population. That, if you've got, a city where there's 46% minority, then you should have a vendor base that reflects that. And there should be opportunities for people of any background to compete and win fair and square based upon their qualifications, but recognizing that having a supplier diversity program does help people get introduced in ways that they may not have been. So can you just help us understand a little bit about your philosophies on supplier diversity? Because I know that is what drives most people in supplier diversity versus the numbers.
Oh, absolutely. So, and I'm so happy that you use the word, in a sense, transactional. So if to me, the difference between a successful supplier diversity professional and one that is, in a sense, average is looking at it from that perspective. If they only view supplier diversity as something that's transactional, then they've lost the battle. Then if they're only looking at supplier diversity as buying products and services from diverse businesses, then they've lost the battle. For my situation and a lot of my peers, we look at supplier diversity as something that's strategic, and you have to. So shortly after I came to Nielsen, I created an acronym called RISE, and it's RIISE. So really that's the strategic focus, in a sense, for our supplier diversity program at Nielsen for the years to come. So the R in RISE is revenue. You have to look at finding revenue-generating opportunities using diverse businesses or selling your products and services to the diverse marketplace. So when you do that, you develop a program that's much more strategic and one that's viewed upon internally at your corporation as a business unit versus just a program. The first I in RISE is income. So I know you mentioned you should not do business with a diverse supplier just because they're diverse. If they're not adding value, then it's difficult for that to be a sustainable opportunity. And so that I has to be important in terms of income. You need to be generating savings for that corporation, or else, again, it's not going to be sustainable. And because diverse suppliers are typically smaller, they have more of the capabilities of being able to control their costs, and so therefore it should equate to some cost savings generation. The second I is infrastructure, and what this is basically talking about the culture at your corporation. So if you were to take any Nielsen associate off the street and ask them about our supplier diversity program, they should be able to tell you about 2 or 3 bullet points about supplier diversity, or else I haven't done my job. The essence in RISE is spend. And so spend is, even though it's an element of supplier diversity, it better not be the only thing. So yeah, it's always going to be a very important metric. We always want to know what we spend, what percentage of our spend was contributed towards diverse businesses, but let that not be the main focal point of your supplier diversity program. And then the E in RISE is something that's near and dear to me, and that's education. So I need to make sure that we have a program that's educating the diverse suppliers, making them stronger, so that they're stronger businesses, not only for Nielsen, but for even some of our competitors. Our job as a corporation is to provide those resources to the diverse suppliers to make them bigger, make them stronger, in a sense be an incubator for these businesses and make them grow from something that's local to something that's global. And then there's also education among the large suppliers, because some of them don't even understand what supplier diversity is. And so if we're going to be an important customer for them, then we need to make sure we're educating them about supplier diversity and how important it is for us.
Wow. Thank you so much, Lamont. That was awesome. Thank you so much for breaking down the acronym RISE that you have installed at Nielsen. That is amazing. They are certainly, fortunate to have you with the level of passion that you have to bring a high level of supplier diversity and the practice of it professionally to their corporation. And it's like I said, it's just an honor to spend some time with you now. One thing that really annoys me is that supplier diversity, with it being so incredibly important, it's not always the popular thing when it comes to corporations. At some, times it's popular, and other times it's not on the top shelf. It's just there. And how can you give other supplier diversity professionals, your colleagues in the industry, how can you give them some tips on staying a priority for the companies where they are versus the flavor of the month or this business development tool that they pull out their back pocket when they think that it's important to their constituencies to look as if they're playing the diversity game?
Well, candidly, you better have passion for this, or else you won't be successful. I've seen supplier diversity professionals that really lack the passion for it, and I think they looked at it as a job. You have to be in these roles and not see it as a job, but really as a lifestyle. And I think those that see it that way are the ones that are successful. And so those that want to listen are the ones that are looking to be successful. So, I know that I can't change people, but I also know that I don't know everything myself. And so I always walk into a situation where I'm trying to find different ways of being able to build our program or build me professionally, just because of some of the great work that some of my peers are doing out there. And so then what I try to do is to pay it forward myself and to bring up, especially those that are new coming into supplier diversity. It's great to get them in the beginning so that they can start building that foundation that's revolving around something that's much more strategic. So that's what I try to do, is to try to get them to see supplier diversity as a strategy, as a business unit, not as just a temporary program. I always hate to hear when people say, well, if I do my job correctly, meaning supplier diversity, you won't have a need for my position in the next few years. I hated that. It's like, wait a minute. That's not true.
No.
You're never going to get to a point where a culture is embracing diversity completely, because there's always going to be differences.
Well,
so
yeah.
So, you know what I mean? So I think we need to get out of that mindset and look at it as something that should be built along the strategy of the company and not something that's separate.
Well, and, it's interesting that you say that, because diversity continues to morph into different and new things. Like now, it's, there's also the inclusion concept. That's not a word that had been around, say 5-10 years ago. Inclusion wasn't a word that we were using, but inclusion has now become a buzzword and just a key staple word in the supplier diversity community, because there are other ways that people are being entered into or ushered into the supplier diversity world based on different qualifications. And, one of those things or one of those categories now is the LGBT community. So that wasn't something that was, on the popular checkoff list in the past, but now it is. And I think that diversity and inclusion will continue to morph as the society begins to recognize the different groups of people who have been overlooked for whatever case. So I don't think supplier diversity will ever go away, but I do think that it's up to supplier diversity professionals to keep it as a focal point for the companies that they work for. And the way that I believe they do that is by showing its value every single day.
Right, completely. And the thing about it is, as long as we realize that it's going to change, then, we are preparing ourselves to make the change. Because I think sometimes we like to step back and say, well, it'll pretty much stay the same, or it'll morph into something that's different, but much later down the line. No, it's morphing right now.
Mm-hmm.
Just like you mentioned, we expanded our supplier diversity program to support LGBT and veterans last year.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was a big area, a new area of opportunity for me, because healthcare had not embraced LGBT yet. And so coming to Nielsen and having a different set of clients, it kind of forced us to look at it. So, I've been fascinated into that world in terms of how they certify their businesses. Mm-hmm. And so I've got a great respect now of that process. So, yeah, you're right. I mean, we've got to be adaptable to the changes.
Yeah, it's going to continue happening. Now, how do you decide, or how does your program decide what priorities you're going to focus on each fiscal year?
Well, we pretty much first of all we have to look and see what Nielsen as a corporation is going into, and so one year it may be global expansion. So if it's global expansion, then I need to make sure that our supplier diversity strategy is aligned with that global expansion. So last year or actually earlier this year, we mentored women-owned companies in Latin America. So we chose 4 different spots in Latin America, and then we're also looking to expand our program into Canada, Africa, and the UK. And again, part of that is driven by the company's decision to look at different parts of the world. Another area that we're looking for is looking at technology. So obviously not everyone is watching TV like they used to in the past, and so they're looking at the television shows from different platforms. I mean, even your radio show, it's not on the platform that happened 20 years ago. So we have to adapt to that. So again, with our supplier diversity program, now I've got to look at suppliers that are able to support the strategies that we have as a corporation moving forward.
Yeah, and then when it comes to expanding abroad, I mean, from my research of international supplier diversity programs, the companies that I found that really had some form of supplier diversity abroad, and it differs based on each country, because each country's concept of diversity is different.
Right.
Each country's concept of procurement and who gets to actually compete for business is different. And so how are you preparing to launch in some of these other parts of the world where there is just a difference in the way that the societies operate? There's a difference in the population. There's a difference in what supplier diversity is or is not. And there's also sometimes not a real perceived need to need it. So how are you preparing for that? Because I think that's fascinating, but I also know that it looks different everywhere.
Well, and that's the thing about it. You cannot have a cookie-cutter approach for your supplier diversity program. You can't think that what you build in America is going to be the same as what you build in Africa, even within the U.S. The way that I build a program in Cincinnati may be different than the way I build a program in New York. So what I do when we look at building a global program is, number one, we've got what's called the employee resource groups. They're what other corporations would call affinity groups. And so we try to tag team with them, because typically they have the first foray into understanding what a country needs in terms of diversity. And so we try to work with them and allow them to be our extended arm into some of these countries, using them and their opportunities, their experiences early on in trying to penetrate those specific geographies, and using that knowledge that they've been able to gain to give us that background, and to also build some of the connections that we could build by using those as resources. I also use some of my peers. If I have peers that have gone out and built successful global supplier diversity programs, I'm not shy to reach out to them and say, hey, how did you do it? I want to do it. I may not be able to do it the same way you've done it, but I'd love to hear what worked for you, what didn't work, things that you would have done differently. Those are the types of ways that you can build a program.
Wow. And it's going to be interesting. I hope that you're going to be documenting how you're doing this, because the world is smaller. It's getting smaller day by day. And with more and more companies wanting to expand and have operations in other parts of the world, it's going to be important for there to be some documented best practices for supplier diversity abroad, more so than what there is today.
Right. Completely agree.
Wow. So then one of the things that I find very interesting is that you've recently written and published a new book. It's Transformational Journey of a Bastard.
Yes.
Now,
provocative title, huh?
Yes, it's a very provocative title, and I understand that it does have some tie-ins to what you're doing and what you have done in your professional career. Help us understand this.
I was challenged 3 years ago by an individual after hearing my story, my personal story, and about 30 minutes later, she was so intrigued by the story that she just challenged me, and she said, "When are you going to write a book?" And honestly, when you think about your life, you never think of your life as unique. You live it. It's your life. You think that everyone faces the same challenges, but my story really starts with in a sense, I grew up in the housing projects of Chicago. So on the west side of Chicago was a housing project called Rockwell Gardens, and we used to get chased and shot at, and just again, you think that this is normal, and it's a shame because in the case for that neighborhood, it was normal. You knew when to be home. You knew that if you didn't get home from school by 3 o'clock, they're probably going to start shooting. So you need to get home. You knew that if you weren't inside the house by a certain time of night, something was going to happen. You also knew that when the atmosphere was calm, you felt uneasy because all of a sudden something was going to happen. So, being challenged, I thought the least thing I can do is to write my story for my kids, to let them see a world that, as long as I have any air to breathe in my body, I'm going to work as hard as I can to make sure that they don't have to live the life that I had to live. So writing that book was really, it served a couple purposes. Number one, it was therapeutic. It gave me a chance to be able to open up some doors that I had closed decades ago, and to be able to write about my experiences. It also gave me a chance as a platform to be able to help those that are either going through that type of situation today or went through it and really didn't understand what they went through and how to, in a sense, make sense of the experiences that they had. So transformational as a word itself, when you break the word down, it's really 2 words. So transform nation. So what I want to do is I want to transform nations one soul at a time. And using this book, using other situations, other types of art that could be used to help those types of individuals from those communities. And then Journey of a Bastard was really the story of who I am. I didn't know who my dad was, didn't meet him until I was close to 30, and so that's what I was growing up and going on my journey was a bastard. And it's I've had people that when I say the title, you can just kind of look in their face and see the astonishment that I would put something like that in there. But what I'm trying to do is to take such a nasty word and flip it and say, yeah, I was a bastard growing up, but I did not allow that to impact me from a negative perspective. Even though I didn't have my father in my life, I was going to be the best father that I could be.
Wow. I just applaud you for opening up at such a level of authenticity and sharing that story, that testimony of your life. I know it's helping so many. And, we don't always walk around with that button on our lapel that, what our upbringing was or what our family structure was growing up. So many people have, grown up without a parent, with operating under a one-parent household. And, it's not always easy for folks to talk about it, especially in the professional world, especially if they haven't done some of the work, the personal development work to be able to talk about it without having a breakdown or meltdown. And so for you to be able to introduce that into, the work that you're doing is just an amazing thing. And I would imagine that it will open doors for you to perhaps do some book touring across the country.
That's what I'm hoping. And the thing about it is, I view my background not as something that first of all, I feel like I was fortunate to have that background because what it did was it made me humble. It made me appreciate everything that I have in life. It made me appreciate even waking up in the morning. And so I think the challenge that we have is to look at situations like that and use them as drivers to push you to succeed versus using it as an excuse. One of the things I don't like is when individuals that come up in a similar situation, they use that as an excuse to not try to succeed. They say, well, I'm destined to fail. Yeah. And that's the worst thing in the world that you can possibly do. So use it as your driver and use it to push you for greatness.
Yeah, and you are definitely among the few who have understood and learned how to take that experience and use it as a launching pad versus a crutch. And people need help learning how to do that. So maybe that's a next book for you. It's showing people how to actually tap into that power to project oneself as a result of having somewhat of a challenged upbringing or coming from a challenged background. And so again, I thank you for that. And I want to know from you what is next. What do you want to see regarding the Nielsen Supplier Diversity Program?
Sure. Well, the first thing is definitely a global program. We have to. We're a global corporation, so it makes no sense for us to not have a global program. So, we're working real hard on that one. But another big piece of what we're trying to do is using the Nielsen brand to establish ourselves within the supplier diversity community and using our assets. So when you think about Nielsen, we're the world's largest global company, world's largest data company. And so when you think about that and you think about our market research capabilities, it makes no sense for us to not be able to tap into that and to establish a brand. So we're actually working on a major research project that would allow us to be able to provide data to the supplier diversity community that did not exist ever. And so, we have those capabilities to be able to get this information, but we just haven't done it yet. So, in an ideal world, I would love to see individuals giving presentations and being able to reference our data in regards to the research that we will be able to do in the area of supplier diversity.
Wow.
Another big piece that we're working on is it's called the Nielsen Supplier Diversity Academy. And so, one of the things when I first came to Nielsen that I had to do initially was to step back and say, we're penalizing the smaller businesses for not being global, because all of the opportunities that we had from a request for proposal perspective were all for national and global opportunities. Mm-hmm. But you got 99% of the businesses out there are small, so that they would never have the opportunity to compete on a national or global scale if they're extremely small. And so what I had to do is to step back and say, why don't we act as true corporate citizens and go out there in the communities that we represent, especially the ones that we have a strong presence in, and we give them the small business owners the education that they need to become eventually a global company. So we're looking at building this program in the cities where we have the major presence in the U.S., and so that includes where we're headquartered at in New York. It also includes Chicago, Tampa, Cincinnati, Los Angeles, Baltimore/DC. We're also looking at a program in Dallas, and then potentially for Rochester, New York. So what we're trying to do is to find opportunities that we can buy products and services from those smaller companies, and then give those organizations a chance from an educational perspective to grow bigger. So we just entered a partnership with Rutgers University so that Nielsen could provide a lot of the practical knowledge, and then we would be able to partner with Rutgers and use their professors to provide the academic knowledge. So it'll be an exciting program. I'm excited for that.
Wow. I mean, that's record-breaking. And it says and it shows exactly what Nielsen should be able to show, and that's how to be savvy and how to be sophisticated with data. Because if you're going to have all this data and have access to all this data and then not be able to benefit the supplier diversity as a whole practice area, then, I think that would be an oversight. And so I applaud you all for being able to supply other colleagues in supplier diversity with data that they can use to perfect their own programs and to be more precise in the practice that they have in the cities where they are. Now, regarding the National Minority Supplier Development Council, which is, you and I met at one of the state council events. How do you all decide or prioritize on which councils and chambers you all support?
Well, number one, we have to make sure that we have a national presence, at least a national presence. And so the National Minority Supplier Development Council, or NMSDC, that is in a sense, the first one of all of the groups, the diversity advocates. And so we have to have a presence with the NMSDC. We have to exhibit at the conferences, and we have to support what they're doing because we believe in it. And then we also are part of the WEBANC, the Women's Business Enterprise National Council, and for the same reasons, but specifically for the women-owned businesses. And then we also, because of our expansion into LGBT-owned companies as well as veteran-owned businesses, we joined the National Gay and Lesbian Chamber of Commerce. And so I was able to attend my second conference this year. It was in Vegas. It was a great conference. We met great potential suppliers for us. And then we also are part of NAVOBA for the veteran businesses. So the national presence is definitely key. But what we also try to do, I mentioned to you the cities where we have a major presence in the U.S. And so what we're trying to do is to establish relationship with some of the diversity advocates at those regional sites as well. So you can't spread yourself too thin, but we definitely are interested in trying to pursue greater opportunities with those associations, if you will, on the local and regional level.
Wonderful. Lamont, tell folks how they can find out more about the Supplier Diversity Program at Nielsen.
So if you go to our website, so www.nielsen.com, and we have no O's in our name, so NIELSEN. So you go to nielsen.com/supplier diversity. You'll be able to go on and check about our program, and also you'll be able to download our annual report. So this year was the second year that we've done an annual report that's received tremendous compliments because of the transparency that we have in it. So that gives you a great idea in terms of our program, the history, and also where we're going to head in the future.
Awesome. And just on a personal level, Lamont, especially regarding your book and your upbringing, how does it make you feel to know that Chicago is still dealing with some of the same problems, if not worse, than when you were growing up?
You know, it saddens me, and the irony of it all is that when I started writing the book, Chicago was not. I mean, Chicago has always dealt with crime all the way since Al Capone. It's just the way that the city is structured. But the crime that you see taking place right now with the youth, that's what kills me, because a lot of these individuals that are either committing the crimes or impacted by the crimes, and one of the things that we forget is most of the victims are not even involved with the criminal activity. They're just innocent bystanders. And so when you hear about a child that was just caught in the crossfires between two gang members, they've fallen in unfortunate situations where they perish, it just saddens me, because what it does is it perpetuates the cycle that we need to break. And that's what I'm hoping that my book will give an opportunity for individuals in these communities to realize that you don't have to be a professional athlete or entertainer to be able to succeed and to be able to escape that situation. But the challenge that we have is, even if you escape it, you still have to do your part to be able to go back and to try to at least help those in that environment, to let them know that, you know what, there's a different way. You don't have to do this. So it sickens me. You know, it's sad. So I had a brother, my only brother, led a local gang in Chicago, and he was pretty much incarcerated for the majority of my life. And unfortunately, he lost his life in 2009. And just thinking about how much of his life was spent behind bars, and he never had a chance to really have the life that I know he could have had. So we have so many potential leaders that are locked up behind bars. You know, so many that could be leaders of their own companies. These could have been CEOs of companies that I could have been working with today, but unfortunately, they're caught up in the mess that we have in society right now.
Wow. And my thing is, with all of the crime that takes place in some of the urban cities around the nation, it's happening in predominantly minority, communities. How can supplier diversity, without moving too far away from its mission, how can supplier diversity as a whole and as a concept drill a little deeper and go younger to capture some of the youth who have potential to go into entrepreneurship and cut off some of that lost potential, if you will, because many of the folks who have gone into business, would say that they've come up through challenging times and through challenging cities and jurisdictions where they really didn't have the support that others in more rich communities might have had. How can supplier diversity do more so that the number of folks who are doing business in minorities there are greater numbers, and many times because someone dug deep and helped?
Akia, that is a great question, and it's one that I've actually pondered along with some of my peers. And the first thing is, when you think about diverse businesses, they're the ones that are employing those types of individuals. Mm-hmm. Typically it's not the corporations. It's those smaller businesses, local community-based businesses that are employing individuals that are looking for that second chance. And so I think that's the first thing is to give opportunities to these businesses so they can go out there and create more jobs in those types of communities. So anytime you have a community that's more vibrant in terms of its economy, you have more job creation and you have less crime, just because you have more individuals that are focused on building, their communities, building their homes financially, and really establishing a blueprint for the future generation. So that's the first thing that would take place if we had more jobs in these communities. The second thing that I think supplier diversity could do is to have these business owners that could be viewed upon as heroes in these neighborhoods, going back to these communities and educating the youth about being entrepreneurs. I think even as a whole, I don't think as a society, I don't think we teach the importance of being an entrepreneur. I think we go to school, we fall into that pattern of I'm going to school to get my education so I can go work for Corporation X. I'm going to work for Corporation X for 30, 40 years. I'm going to retire. I'm going to live nice. Versus I'm going to go to school, get my level of education that I'm looking for, and then open up my own business using that level of education. So then that way, if I'm able to open up my own business, I can go out there and hire individuals that typically would not be hired by corporations, and I can establish, a blueprint not only for my children, but for these individuals that I'm bringing into the corporation and into the companies that I've hired them to support. So I didn't even realize that African Americans could be entrepreneurs until I saw the Jeffersons. So George Jefferson was the first time that I saw a man that looked like me that owned his own business. So can you imagine the power, the impact of a minority seeing a business owner that's minority, one that looks like him or her, and one that is hiring individuals that look like him or her, building these successful programs. Just imagine how impactful that is to someone and really a community as a whole.
Yeah, that's powerful. And I hope you all do make some traction with digging a bit deeper, going a bit younger, trying to capture some of that talent while it's still budding, and grooming those youth and young adults in cities across the country to grow into supplier diversity, to grow into entrepreneurship. And at that time, what you said earlier, when someone says they look forward to a day when their role is no longer needed, like I said, because inclusion continues to morph and change to new things, I think we can get to a point where it's more of a household name than it is now. And so I thank you so much for spending time with me. I've been spending time with Lamont Robinson, who's the Vice President of Supplier Diversity for Nielsen. You can find out about his program at Nielsen.com/supplier diversity. As he said, Nielsen does not have an O in it. And so you can find out about his program at Nielsen.com/supplier diversity. He's also an author of Transformational Journey of a Bastard. Lamont, where can they find out about your book?
So you can go to the website, TransformNational.com, and don't forget the N in it. A lot of people say transformational, but it's actually TransformNational. So you can do that, or you can go to Amazon. It's also available on Amazon.
Awesome. Again, thank you so much for spending time with us this week on the Akia Garnett Show and for Tuesday Branding, Lamont. You are someone that I salute, and I thank you so much for giving us just a few moments of your time to explain about your supplier diversity program, about your initiative as an author, and the other wonderful things that you've been doing to help us all master our brand. So there you have it, folks. We'll see you next time on another edition of the Akia Garnett Show. Take care, Lamont.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Akia.
She'll take it from where you are. She's here to motivate, here to recreate. The Akia Garnett Show. Inspiration, motivation. The Akia Garnett Show. Recreation, reformation. The Akia Garnett Show. Dedication, expectation. The Akia Garnett Show.